Unfortunate doesn't begin to describe my series. This game rewards blind luck and nothing else. You may have heard these words before, but if you haven't, you may be surprised that this did not come from a random scrub on the showdown ladder, but rather one of the most infamous top players of all time, Lavos. But who was Lavos? What made him so mad? What happened to him? Well, I'll give you the tale, from start to finish. This is a story of heartbreak and triumph, a story of tears and cheers, and a story of scandals. This is the story of Lavos, Pokemon's disgraced champion. Raised in Idaho, Lavos was born in the late 90s. Growing up, he was an avid fan of League of Legends, Civ, and notably Chrono Trigger, which is the game his username originates from. His drive for competition started at a young age, where at the age of 3 he found a chessboard in his home and asked his parents to teach him how to play. Even from the start, he was already dedicated to getting better, even asking for chess books for his 4th birthday. It was something he was incredibly dedicated to, coming home from school and immediately starting to play. Lavos would begin entering chess tournaments when he was 5 years old, and according to him, he won just about every tournament he had entered in his small Idaho scene when he started, though he was never able to claim the title of the state championship. More importantly though, this would be the ignition for his love for competition, always wanting to be the best at whatever it was he put himself to. After getting a Game Boy Advance at the age of 7, he quickly became a Pokemon fan. His first contact with the series was Pokemon Fire Red version on the Game Boy Advance. After being hooked on the series, he would play just about every available title, even going back to Red and Crystal versions. What Lavos was drawn in by especially was the competitive aspect. Even before Smogon, he would play many Link battles with his brother and friends, pushing for victories in each game. Lavos would get his first meeting with true competitive Pokemon when he gained the ability to use a computer around the age of 9, which is how he learned about the existence of EVs and IVs, two Pokemon mechanics integral to competition. Just as importantly though, Lavos would discover Pokemon Online, which you can think of as Pokemon Showdown's predecessor, though Pokemon Online had some stark differences. Notably, there was a server system in which you could form clans and play other people within the server. He downloaded Pokemon Online and started playing Dream World OU, a format in Pokemon Black and White where unreleased Pokemon such as Shadowtag Chandelure were allowed. Lavos would mainly play on a smaller server separate from the main one and vied with others in it to be the best. But sometimes people from the main Pokemon Online server would join and utterly defeat him. These defeats led Lavos to an understanding that he too would have to join the main server in order to sharpen his skills, and thus his true journey would begin. Lavos joined the Smogon forums in March of 2012, and it didn't take him very long to gain notoriety. Every year Smogon hosts its World Cup, a tournament where players across the world form teams representing their respective regions. Here Lavos would make a name for himself on Team USA West. Initially though, Lavos wasn't on their roster, but due to an unforeseen dropout from one of the players, they were holding tryouts. Even in the beginning, Lavos was creating a bit of a fuss. Lavos came in and started boasting that he was the best player and far superior than anybody else who wanted to join the team. Philip7086, another member of the team, put him through some of the tryouts, and Lavos actually made it onto the team. Lavos was a hothead and extremely toxic. In his own words, he treated his opponents like trash and didn't respect anyone else's opinion. And in his first World Cup game, those words would be backed up by a loss. Lavos lost his World Cup debut game. Many players wrote him off as a chump who was all talk, but no talent to back it up. Yet, this loss would not be indicative of what was to come in the tournament though, as Lavos would have a great rebound as his World Cup tournament run would end with him tying for the highest number of wins in the tournament, including a victory over someone considered a Smogon legend now, BKC, in the finals, bringing home the victory for his team. This brought many new eyes on him. A relatively unknown player had tied for the highest number of wins in the tournament and won the entire thing. He was interviewed as a new rising star in the Smogon community, where he said his sights were set on the Smogon Tour 14, one of the most prestigious events of the year. In this tournament, competitors play the 3 most recent generations of Smogon OU, which at the time was Black and White, Diamond and Pearl, and ADV. Lavos would enter this tournament and through an arduous season make playoffs, where he would face Kevin Garrett in the first round. He defeated him and then made his way to his next opponent, Malekith. He was off to a great start, defeating him in ADV OU. But Malekith bounced back and beat Lavos in DPP and then Black and White OU. Lavos was upset by this result, but more importantly, he was salty. He didn't say anything crazy, but he did leave this message, wishing his opponent a loss against BKC. He actually said something way funnier in one of his previous losses in a prior Smogon tournament after losing to Luck. Lavos had begged his opponent to forfeit like a man, because he deserved the win, and lost due to luck rather than skill, which players would later poke fun at here. Again, it's not really the worst thing you could say, but it was a glimpse into what would later bloom into something far more sinister. In a heated set between BKC and McMegan, ultimately BKC fell and McMegan claimed the crown, one of what would become many. Lavos may not have won this tournament, but he did establish himself as a strong competitor, one who was more than just a one-hit wonder, someone who could compete at the highest level, and someone who would get incredibly salty. Both of these traits would only grow in the future. Lavos, over the course of 7 years, really made a name for himself on Smogon in 2019. Outside of battle, he was known for being quite the toxic player, especially when he lost. He had many outbursts and made inflammatory comments towards others, making him have a sort of heel position in the community because of it. But he was undoubtedly one of the strongest players of the time and was a frontrunner for many tournaments. Lavos trained incredibly hard and pushed himself not only in the current tiers, but in older generations like ADV and DPP, getting help from other players like BKC. Lavos says that playing these tiers straightened out his play, as learning multiple generations helps you not fall into habits created by the one that you're focused on. He also discovered his favorite tier, GSC, and by 2019 he had been known as the strongest GSC player in the world, even defeating BKC in his prime. Lavos enjoyed this tier because although it appeared to be pretty small with a limited pool of Pokemon and only one real item choice, it had so much depth to it, and making one wrong play still left you with the ability to win if you played well enough for the rest of the game. Lavos had started to dominate the second generation of Pokemon, and it was during this 2-year period he would find his greatest successes in tournament. The most infamous of these, well, besides the obvious, would be his performance in the Smogon Classic 4 in 2018. Smogon Classic is a tournament series where competitors compete across the 5 classic generations of Pokemon, generations 1 through 5. It is a best of 5 series that's not only a test of skill, but also endurance, as these games can often run very long and a best of 5 can show its strain over time. Even the smallest of mistakes can cost a player their entire tournament run, and those become even easier to make over the course of 5 games. Lavos was the most threatening player for Generation 2, but he was no slouch in the other generations. He made it to the playoffs as the 6th seed and was matched up against the 11th seed Keenan. He made quick work of his first playoffs match though with a 3-0, defeating Keenan in the first 3 generations. His quarterfinals game was against M Dragon, and Lavos won the first generation game without too much trouble, but in an odd twist of fate, it was the second generation Lavos would take his first loss of playoffs in, being unable to break past M Dragon's Skarmory. Generation 3 wasn't any better for Lavos though. He was beaten down by the offensive threats on M Dragon's team. But Generation 4 went his way, as Lavos was able to pull back a victory. And yet, this itself was controversial too. See, Lavos had been using a baton pass team with Ninjask and Machamp. The strategy focuses on Ninjask, a Pokemon with the ability Speed Boost, which boosts its speed at the end of each turn. Ninjask sets up a substitute and a Swords Dance on lead and then passes it to a teammate to enable them to sweep. This strategy was considered pretty uncompetitive, leading to many volatile games and often came down to you either had a way to beat it or you didn't, leading to its ban eventually, though it was legal for this tournament. Along with this Ninjask, Lavos also had a Machamp, a Pokemon with the move Dynamic Punch, a 100 power, 50% accurate move that always confuses the target. But Machamp also has the ability No Guard, which guarantees its moves land regardless of accuracy. Machamp is a Pokemon that fishes for confusion while dealing considerable damage with Dynamic Punch. It's another volatile Pokemon that revolves heavily around RNG, making it pretty looked down upon. M-Dragon let Lavos know as much in the chat after his loss. The Generation 5 game though was nowhere near as eventful, as Lavos' Excadrill cleaned up the endgame, earning him a spot in the semifinals against Lax. But like his first set in playoffs, it ended in a 3-0. Lavos' finals match was against Ojama, and he won his Generation 2 game with a cross chop to finish off Ojama's Tyranitar. Generation 3 wasn't much better for Ojama either, and so it all came down to the Generation 4 game. In the end, Lavos wins this match, using his Rotom Wash to take down Infernape, winning him the set. And yet, despite his Rotom being the last Pokemon on the field, If you look at the tournament Smogon page, strangely it's listed that there's no winner, but why? Lavos had clearly won his finals game, so what happened? Well, as it turns out, the tournament had a cheating scandal, one that involved Lavos. In competitive Pokemon, ghosting is a concept where a player is communicating with someone else who is currently playing a game, coaching them to achieve a better result. This is very understandably cheating in most tournaments, as tournaments are meant to be a contest between two players. One having a coach behind them gives that player an unfair advantage over the other. Alodin, the player who was getting ghosted, was a great friend of Lavos, and it turns out Lavos was coaching Alodin in their Gen 2 games. But ghosting is hard to prove. I mean, a player can make those plays themselves without someone else helping them, and it's very hard to get proof as it often takes place in private chat rooms. But it is much easier to prove if one of those people involved comes forward with it. And well, someone did. Alodin admitted to Smogon staff that Lavos did ghost the Gen 2 games, and this led to Lavos being banned for a year, with Alodin getting a lighter 9-month ban because of the admission. This also retroactively took away Lavos' Smogon Classic win after he was caught, since it was that tournament he cheated in. But why did Alodin do this? According to Lavos, it was Alodin's idea in the first place, and they were great friends. So why did Alodin report this offense to begin with? Well, it turns out they had a falling out, and according to Lavos, the next thing he knew, he woke up, he'd been tournament banned for ghosting, because Alodin decided to go back and leak the logs and get himself banned to get Lavos banned for a year. That is what Lavos had to say about the situation. Lavos admits to ghosting, though only against Finchinator in a swift 2-0. Lavos still had success after this tournament though. In Smogon Premier League 10, he may have had the highlight of his career. His team, the Alpha Ruiners, won in an extremely close set against the Dragon Spiral Tyrants, which had players like Blunder and PokeMD, people who you may recognize. The match came down to a tiebreaker set, and Lavos was an instrumental part of the success, as throughout the tournament he had only lost a single game in Week 6. He won every other Gen 2 game and a Black and White game, achieving a 12-1 record, the greatest in Smogon Premier League history, since he was also fighting the best of the best, the strongest competition in one of the strongest eras of Pokemon. Not only that, but he also won the entire thing for his team in the final game of the tiebreaker set in finals. And again, Lavos fought the toughest opponents in his generation, and he still came out with such consistency. He not only emerged victorious in one of the most prestigious tournaments of the year, he was the absolute center of it, and the strongest player in the tournament by far. Lavos then set his sights on 2 more tournaments after this. The World Cup of Pokemon, but more importantly, the Smogon Classic series. But little did anyone know, the Classics would be the last tournament games Lavos would ever play. If you're enjoying the video so far, I would really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, or leave a comment, and maybe even hype the video. I put a lot of effort into my content, and any support goes a long way for smaller creators like me. Alright, back to the video. For a long time, pressure had been mounting on Lavos. The combination of being a top player and his fits of rage made him a prime candidate for heckling. Losing a game to anyone, especially someone who wasn't a top player, would be an opening for people to hate on him. This created a lot of stress for Lavos, which in turn made him have more outbursts. It became a positive feedback loop that was honestly quite unhealthy. Lavos estimates he put 30 hours a week into the game, and because of this, failure was not an option. His ego was tied to it at this point. More than that aversion to losing though, he wanted to win. Lavos had already been quite the accomplished player, but there was still one prestige he wanted more than any other. Lavos wanted to be the first player to win back-to-back Smogon Classics. It would be an achievement that would cement himself as the greatest old generation player, and that was a title Lavos wanted more than anything else. The Smogon Classics, as I explained before, is a tournament that spans across the 5 classic generations of Pokemon. Lavos had won the finals of the Classic 4 and would now aim to be the champion of Smogon Classic 5. At the same time though, Lavos would be helping his team, USA West, through the Smogon World Cup. Going back to the Classics though, the tournament structure for that series is there are 5 individual tournaments, 1 for each generation. Players participate in all 5 and gain points based on how well they do in each. The players with the highest points move on to playoffs to play best of 5 sets, 1 game in each generation. After the initial qualifying round, the final 16 players were decided. Most notably, there was McMegan and BKC, who completely won the ADV and DPP Cups respectively. Of course, every player was a threat though. You didn't get this far without real skill. The first seed of the tournament and the winner of the GSC Cup was none other than Lavos himself. Earning a perfect record in the GSC Cup catapulted him to the #1 position with 44 points, 10 more than the second seed, and now he was the favorite to win. His first opponent would be Flaming Victini, the 16th seed, but Lavos utterly crushed him in a 3-0. Lavos' next opponent would be a ghost from the past, a player that defeated him many years ago, none other than Malekith, the player that crushed his Smogon tour run all those years ago in 2012. Just like that last set, Lavos had a great start, defeating Malekith in ADVOU with 2 Pokemon remaining. But next would be the generation that started Lavos' loss all those years ago, DPP. It would be here that Lavos' growth would be truly tested. The game started off horridly for Malekith, missing a Hydro Pump against Hippowdon, a move that would have utterly obliterated it. And after that, Malekith just couldn't break through Lavos' defenses, and he lost the generation he initially had defeated Lavos in. And in Gen 5, after Malekith's team was weakened a little bit, Lavos was able to pulverize it using a Calm Mind Cresselia. And so, after defeating his old demon, Lavos was able to move on to the semifinals, against one of the strongest players in Smogon history, the player who had won the ADV Cup, the winner of that same Smogon Tour 14 from all those years ago, McMegan. Game 1 is in Lavos' territory, GSC. Unsurprisingly, he defeated McMegan with Raikou finishing a 163 turn battle. Next up though would be McMegan's Kingdom, ADV. This was supposed to be McMegan's forte. He was the ADV Cup winner after all, and yet, after 28 turns, he found himself having lost to Lavos. Lavos was 1 game away from proceeding to the finals, but he still had to finish out this set. At the start of the Generation 1 game, Lavos wished his opponent good luck, something that would end up backfiring as McMegan was able to win his first game of the set with some luck against Lavos and put himself on the board. Still, Lavos had 2 more games to work with, but in the Generation 5 game, in what Lavos would call a bad matchup, McMegan was able to shatter Lavos' Dragmag team with Keldeo in a mere 13 turns, leaving the set tied 2-2. 1 final game left, Generation 4, a game that would live in infamy for years to come. Though Lavos had lost the 2 previous games, he went into this battle with a plan. He analyzed McMegan's previous games and noticed his teams were generally weak to lead Heatran, so that was the lead of his choice. But McMegan knew this too, and for what was supposed to be a good lead for Lavos turned sour as his Heatran faced down a Gyarados, a perfect counter to lead Heatran. Gyarados resisted Heatran's fire moves, could hit Heatran with the super effective Waterfall, a move with a 20% chance to flinch, and Gyarados was also immune to Heatran's Earth Power. If that wasn't enough, after an Intimidate attack drop, Gyarados would never fall to Explosion unless it hit a critical hit. Lavos was on the back foot, but not in a losing position just yet. He makes a switch into his own Gyarados, dropping the opposing's attack by 1 stage, but McMegan Dragon Dances, neutralizing the effect of the Intimidate. Then Lavos goes into Jirachi, a Pokemon of many talents. This Jirachi carries Thunder Punch, a move that will one-hit KO Gyarados if it can get it off. But McMegan uses this opportunity to set up another Dragon Dance. The next turn, Lavos will have Jirachi use Thunder Punch, but it has to survive a Waterfall first. Gyarados attacks, and while Jirachi survives, it unfortunately gets flinched by Waterfall, leaving it unable to move. Lavos is shaken up by this. Jirachi, his best way of beating Gyarados, will simply fate to the next Waterfall, so this will have achieved absolutely nothing. He goes back into his own Gyarados to reduce McMegan's Gyarados' attack, and the next turn both Gyarados exchange Dragon Dances. But on the following turn, McMegan reveals Stone Edge, a move that will decimate Lavos' Gyarados. But it's not over yet. If this Gyarados has Stone Edge, it might not have Ice Fang, so Lavos goes into his Breloom, and after handily taking a Waterfall, it uses Spore to sleep McMegan's Gyarados. But McMegan was prepared for that, and Gyarados eats its Alum Berry to cure itself of the sleep. Next turn, McMegan reveals the final move on Gyarados, Taunt, preventing Breloom from going for another Spore. Next turn, Gyarados goes for Waterfall again, and unfortunately for Lavos, he is flinched a second time, leaving Breloom unable to move. Lavos sacks his Jirachi as he sees it less valuable than his Breloom at this point, and brings in the Pokemon he started this game with, Heatran. Now this might seem strange to you, going back into the Pokemon that put you into this position in the first place, but it is actually Lavos' final way of clawing back the advantage. See, at the start of the game, Heatran was afflicted by Gyarados' Intimidate, reducing its attack. This meant that Heatran could not KO Gyarados with Explosion, but now that Heatran was back in the game fresh without an Intimidate drop, Explosion was ready to KO Gyarados. or rather, it would. But unfortunately, Heatran gets flinched too. At this point, frustrated and defeated, Lavos concedes as Gyarados will sweep the rest of his team. And then, it starts. Unfortunate doesn't begin to describe my series. This game rewards blind luck and nothing else. I am beyond convinced at this point. After getting completely tooled by scheduling with my opponent changing times on me last minute and refusing to provide confirmation prior to the day of the match, as to play times, losing this way somehow felt even worse than I had thought possible. My preparation was superior, my play was superior, and I lost. So I don't see a reason to continue engaging in an activity where what is within my control is overwhelmingly outweighed by what is not. I am done with competitive Pokemon, and you won't get a fond farewell. This community is infected to its roots with a degenerative disease that grows stronger over time, but stops short of killing its host. Tournaments used to have a competitive spirit at their heart. This has been transplanted and replaced with an artificial organ that feeds on vitriol and mockery from insecure little boys that heckle by the sidelines and tear each other to shreds over the scraps of attention. The environment we fostered has trapped us all like this in a vicious cycle, and escaping it requires acceptance of the harshest reality we all scramble to explain away, that none of the countless straining efforts we put ourselves through here will ever amount to one single shining glimmer of significance. I would make this the end, but World Cup is still ongoing, and I would never leave so many great friends out to dry, so I'll suffer through a few more games for them. One last thing before I leave you all to react with disdain, ridicule, and self-righteous fervor. Before you do everything in your power to minimize my words and thoughts, box them up and shove them to some cobwebbed corner of your memory and hope they disappear forever, as a stain on your finite time ground to dust. From this moment on, nothing you say matters to me. The foulest insults you hurl with intent to wound will calmly settle at the earth before my feet, and the venom you spit will bring all the pain of a warm summer breeze. You are less than anything you can conceive, while I carry on, brimming with joy distilled from detachment. This forum post was posted on July 8th, 2019, and continues to live on in infamy to this day. This post was so full of salt and rage, people just had to make fun of it. I mean, Lavos was talking like a supervillain in this legendary monologue. And believe me, people did make fun of him for it. Complaining about luck despite being a player who had reaped its benefits, talking about toxicity despite his own, and of course all the colorful language he used. It was the perfect storm. It became a copy pasta that expanded far beyond the Smogon space. It became the most liked post in Smogon history, and probably the most iconic post on the website. Though Lavos said he would play a few games after this for World Cup, those never came to be as Lavos was banned for different reasons. Toxicity apparently, but I've never been able to nail down specifics why, and I won't speculate on it. He did help his team specifically in GSC prep and team building otherwise, and they did end up winning the whole thing, but ultimately, that didn't matter. This was Lavos' legacy now. Now, many of you may know Lavos from this post on the Smogon forums. You might also know that after this, besides helping his teammate win the World Cup of Pokemon and a sighting on Hearthstone, Lavos vanished without a trace. However, this is not completely true. In 2020, over a year after the Smogon Classic incident, Lavos would give an interview with Callus Narrates, another Smogon player. In fact, much of the information here is sourced from that interview. So what does Lavos have to say about the incident a year later? Lavos himself admits there was a lot of emotions that may have hyperbolized what he said in the post, and he doesn't stand by everything. He says that he was under a lot of stress and admittedly self-generated toxicity from others, and a loss like that was simply the last straw. But it was a build-up all the way from 7 years prior to expectations from his success in the World Cup of Pokemon in 2012 was the beginning of it all. You may remember remember Lavos asking his opponent to forfeit like a man after getting hexed in an earlier part of this video. Well, that alongside his other salt came into full bloom here in the unfortunate post. But Lavos says that it was also the beginning of an unhealthy relationship with the game. His personal ego was tied to his success in Pokemon, creating the stress and toxicity. He also didn't mean for it to be personal with his opponent and regrets any disrespect he may have shown to him. In this interview, he also elaborates on what he meant when he called Smogon a pretty awful place. He says a lot of people think that they know the game better than they do, and they chirp about players, and that ate away at him, and probably many others as well. But despite this, at the same time, Smogon posts itself as a very welcoming and open community where everyone is free to come and compete, no questions asked. Here's a big question he was asked too. After a year off from the game, did Lavos have any desire to play Pokemon again? Would it ever be possible he would return to the game? Lavos says after a year he came to recognize that competitive Pokemon wasn't actually that bad of a competitive game compared to a lot of others. There's a lot of room for self-expression and playstyle, and he really enjoys 4 or 5 of the generations that he thinks are excellent competitive experiences. However, he says that the premier competitive Pokemon website, referring to Smogon, is run by a bunch of idiots and people who bow down to the authority of these idiots. He said he doesn't have a stake in competitive Pokemon anymore, and he hasn't played a serious game since he was banned. Lavos said he'd never dedicate the level of time and intensity he did before his ban, and obviously since he's banned he can't participate in Smogon tournaments anymore, but if an opportunity did arise, he might give it a shot. But he doesn't have that drive anymore. He's felt the peak of the mountain but doesn't care to reach it again. I looked around but I couldn't find anything on Lavos playing in a tournament after though. You can watch this interview for yourself if you want to. I'll leave it in the description below. I met a traveler from an antique land who said 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that his sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive stamped on those lifeless things. The hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Ozymandias is a poem about a man who in his prime boasted the title King of Kings, whose constructions were so great that you could only look at them in despair. Yet after all these years, the only thing people can see is his boasting, with his works left in a pathetic ruin. Similarly, Lavos was once amongst Smogon's finest players, playing a central role in many team tournaments and even winning the Smogon Classic. Well, until that got revoked. Yet an outburst after losing a set to luck is the only thing people recognize about him. His patheticness, his ruin, his final rage post and departure. Once one of the mightiest, Lavos is not recognized for his dominance, but rather his salt. But maybe this video changed that for you. I'm hoping you may have learned something about Smogon's rich history. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe, leave a comment, like, or hype the video. You might also enjoy this other video I made on another set lost to extreme luck. Let me know if there are any other player stories you'd like me to cover, and until next time, see ya.